I am Carter Hayes. I'm 32 years old, and 5 years ago my own family threw me out into the cold Ohio night with nothing but a packed bag and a broken heart. Before I tell you about the quiet, two-word sentence that shattered their world when they came crawling back, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's amazing to see how far a story can travel. The doorbell chimed through the house with a soft, melodic tone I'd chosen myself. It was a sound designed for peace, a gentle alert, not an alarm. On that quiet Saturday morning, it felt like a gunshot. I was in my studio, the one that overlooks the canyon, with floor-to-ceiling glass walls that make you feel like you're floating. Sunlight poured in, glinting off the silver awards on my shelf and warming the polished concrete floor. A half-finished animation sequence was paused on my main monitor, a scene from my studio's next big project. Life was good. It was structured. It was quiet. The chime went off again, a little more insistent this time. I sighed, wiping a smudge of charcoal from my hand onto my jeans. I wasn't expecting anyone. My business partner, Chloe, was in New York for a conference. My lawyer, Jessica, only communicated through email unless the world was ending. I walked through the open-plan living space, past the minimalist furniture and the abstract art I'd collected. My bare feet were silent on the cool floor. Through the frosted glass panel beside the massive oak door, I could make out 3 figures, silhouettes against the bright California sun. My heart gave a strange, unfamiliar lurch. It wasn't fear. It was something colder. Recognition. I took a deep breath, centered myself, and pulled the heavy door inward. And there they were. My father, Frank. My mother, Eleanor. And my older brother, Leo. The holy trinity of my past, standing on the travertine steps of my present. 5 years. 5 years of absolute silence, and now this. My father's face was a mess of emotions. His eyes, wide and disbelieving, darted from the soaring roofline of the house to the infinity pool shimmering to his left, then to the landscaped gardens that cascaded down the hillside. He was wearing a faded polo shirt, the kind he wore to mow the lawn back in Ohio, and it looked painfully out of place against the backdrop of my life. My mother clutched her purse to her chest like a shield. Her hair was grayer than I remembered, and new lines were etched around her mouth. She looked frail, diminished, but the look in her eyes was the same one I'd known my whole life. Anxious, pleading, and desperately avoiding any real conflict. And then there was Leo, the golden boy. His high school football glory had long since faded, replaced by a softer jawline and a tired look in his eyes. He tried for a confident smirk, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. He was staring at the Tesla parked in my driveway, his mouth slightly agape. Their collective shock was a physical thing, a wave of stunned silence that washed over my doorstep. This wasn't the life they had predicted for me. This wasn't the life of a failed artist, the starving dreamer they had cast out. This was power, and they could feel it. Frank was the first to find his voice, forcing a grin that looked more like a grimace. "Carter," he said, his voice raspy. "Well, look at you." My mother took a hesitant step forward. "We were in the area," she whispered, a lie so thin it was transparent. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I just looked at them, the ghosts of Christmas past, and let the silence stretch. They had come here for a reason, and it wasn't for a family reunion. Before I tell you the calm, simple words that made their faces turn pale with shock, before I expose the ugly truth they tried to hide behind their sob stories, I need to take you back. Back to where this all began. Back to a small house in Ohio, a boy with a sketchbook, and a family that only knew how to break things. Stick with me. You won't believe what happened next. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this is a journey you'll want to see through to the end. Growing up in our little bungalow in Ohio, our house had 2 religions. My father's pragmatism and my brother's football. The living room wasn't a place for family. It was a shrine to Leo. One entire wall was dedicated to his achievements. Shelves groaned under the weight of gold-painted plastic trophies, framed newspaper clippings yellowing at the edges, and a ridiculously large photo of him in his high school uniform, frozen in a triumphant roar. That was the altar at which my parents worshipped. My art, on the other hand, was heresy. My sanctuary was a cramped corner of my bedroom, a small desk littered with pencils, ink pots, and stacks of paper. I drew for hours, losing myself in worlds of knights, dragons, and sprawling sci-fi cities. It was the only place I felt in control, the only place my own world made sense. To my father, it was just garbage. I remember one afternoon I was maybe 12. I just finished a detailed drawing of a knight in impossibly intricate armor, a piece I'd spent a week on. I was proud of it, so proud that I made the mistake of showing it to my father when he came home from his job at the factory. He glanced at it, his face impassive. He managed the floor, a job that required shouting over machinery and seeing everything in terms of efficiency and output. My drawing had no output. It was inefficient. "What's this?" he grunted, not taking the paper. "It's a knight," I said, my voice small. "I finished it." He finally took it, held it for a second, and then I heard the sound that became the soundtrack to my childhood. The crisp, violent crumpling of paper. He squeezed it into a tight ball in his fist. "Fantasy garbage," he said, his voice flat. He didn't even look at me. He just tossed the wadded-up paper into the kitchen trash can on his way to the fridge to grab a beer. "Won't pay the bills, Carter. You need to get your head out of the clouds and into the real world. Be more like your brother." I stood there, frozen. My chest felt tight, like he'd crushed my lungs instead of my drawing. I looked over at my mother, who was at the sink, pretending to be busy washing a dish that was already clean. She saw the whole thing. She saw the look on my face. She saw my masterpiece land next to a banana peel in the trash. She said nothing. Her silence was a constant presence, a thick, suffocating blanket over the whole house. It was her answer to everything. When Leo would shove me and call me a freak for drawing instead of watching the game, she'd just sigh and turn up the volume on the TV. When Frank would lecture me at the dinner table about getting a real skill, she would just meticulously cut her green beans into smaller and smaller pieces, her eyes fixed on her plate. Her silence wasn't peace. It was agreement. It was her way of saying, "Your father is right. You are wrong." Then there was my Aunt Patty, my mom's sister. She was the one who played the part of the sympathetic ear. She'd visit on weekends, pulling me aside with a sweet, conspiratorial smile. "Oh, honey," she'd whisper, patting my hand. "Don't you mind your father. He just doesn't understand art. He loves you, he just worries." Her words felt like honey laced with poison. She made me feel seen, but she never once defended me in front of Frank. Instead, she'd go back to the living room and talk to my parents in low tones. Years later, I'd realize she was the one stirring the pot, telling them my obsession was getting worse, that I was drifting away. She was the master manipulator, playing both sides to feel important. The message from my family was clear, hammered into me day after day. Leo was the sun, the center of our universe, the one whose future was a straight line to success. His path was practical, respectable. I was the shadow, the disappointment, the weird kid in the corner with his useless drawings. They weren't just discouraging a hobby. They were trying to extinguish a part of my soul. But the funny thing about fire is, the more you try to stamp it out, the more it learns to find oxygen in the most unlikely of places. The only place I found oxygen was in room 2B, the high school art classroom. It smelled of turpentine and clay, a scent I came to associate with freedom. And it was ruled by Professor Albright. He wasn't just a teacher, he was a lifeline. He was a tall, gangly man with paint stains on almost every shirt he owned and eyes that saw things other people missed. He didn't just see a kid drawing dragons. He saw perspective, he saw anatomy, he saw a storyteller. "Carter," he told me once, holding one of my sketches up to the light, "don't ever let anyone tell you this isn't a real skill. Storytelling through images is as old as humanity. It's a craft. It's a profession. You have the gift." His words were like water in a desert. He encouraged me to enter local art contests. He gave me books on animation and film theory. He saw a future for me that I was beginning to believe didn't exist. It was also in that classroom that I met Chloe Martinez. She was fierce, brilliant, and had a sarcastic wit that could cut glass. While I was quiet and introverted, Chloe was a force of nature. She was a master of digital art, her fingers flying across a tablet while mine were smudged with graphite. We were opposites, but we connected instantly over our shared passion and our mutual understanding of being the weird art kids. We dreamed of one day starting our own animation studio, a crazy, impossible dream we'd whisper about in the back of the class. With Albright's encouragement, I secretly started building a portfolio. I worked relentlessly, honing my skills, pouring all the frustration and loneliness I felt at home into my work. My senior year, I took a huge leap of faith. I applied for a full scholarship to the most prestigious art and design college in California. It felt like buying a lottery ticket to another planet. I didn't tell a soul, not even Chloe. It was my secret, a fragile little flame of hope I had to protect from the winds of my family's disapproval. The day the acceptance letter came, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely tear it open. It was a thick envelope. That was a good sign. I read the words, and the world tilted on its axis. Congratulations! We are pleased to offer you the Presidential Merit Scholarship, covering full tuition, full ride, to California. It wasn't real. I read it again, and again. The words blurred through my tears. It was my ticket out, my validation, my proof that I wasn't just some useless dreamer. But the joy was immediately followed by a cold, heavy wave of dread. I knew what this meant. This letter wasn't just an acceptance. It was a declaration of war. Showing this to my family wouldn't be a celebration. It would be a confrontation. It was me standing in front of my father and telling him that everything he believed about me, everything he had tried to beat out of me, was wrong. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and hid it under my mattress. Felt like a ticking bomb. For a week, I walked around the house with this explosive secret, this key to a future they would never understand. I knew the fallout would be catastrophic. I just didn't know it would be the blast that would sever me from my family forever. At the time, I didn't realize how deep the wound would be, or that their disapproval was hiding something much darker than simple pragmatism. It was a curse, a belief that my success would somehow diminish their precious golden boy. I chose Christmas dinner to tell them. It was a calculated risk. I thought maybe, just maybe, the so-called holiday spirit might soften the blow. The house smelled of roasted turkey and pine needles from the fake tree we'd used for a decade. The mood was deceptively calm. Leo was bragging about his prospects for a sports scholarship, and my father was hanging on his every word, his chest puffed out with pride. My hands were sweating under the table. I waited for a lull in the conversation, cleared my throat, and the words just tumbled out. I have some news, I said. The table went quiet. All eyes turned to me, a rare event. I won a full scholarship to the California College of Arts. Silence. Not a happy silence. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. You could have heard a pin drop. Leo broke it with a short, sharp snort of laughter. A scholarship for what? Doodling? My father put his fork and knife down with a deliberate, loud click. His eyes narrowed, the good cheer vanishing from his face as if it had never been there. California? He said, his voice dangerously low. You're going to move halfway across the country to draw cartoons? It's one of the best animation schools in the world. Dad? I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I slid the acceptance letter, which I'd brought to the table like a piece of evidence, across the tablecloth. The scholarship covers everything. It's a huge honor. He didn't even pick it up. He just glared at the envelope as if it were a snake. An honor? I'll tell you what's an honor. Getting a business degree. Getting a real job. Your brother understands that. He's got his head on straight. What is wrong with you? The heat rose in my face. There's nothing wrong with me. This is my future. Your future. He laughed. A bitter, ugly sound. Your future is a dead end, Carter. It's a fantasy. We didn't raise you to be a bum, chasing some stupid, artsy dream. The money from your mother's inheritance is meant for a real college fund, for a real education, not for this nonsense. I looked at my mother. Her face was pale, her eyes darting between me and my father. She was twisting her napkin in her lap, shredding it into little pieces. "Eleanor, tell him," my father commanded. "Tell him he's being a fool." She looked at me, her eyes filled with tears, and she whispered, "Honey, maybe just think about it. Your father is only worried about you." That was it. The final betrayal. Not a defense. Not a word of support. Just another plea for me to surrender. That's when my father stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He pointed a trembling finger at me. His face was red, a vein pulsing in his forehead. "This is it, Carter. You choose. You either throw that letter in the trash, enroll in community college for business like we discussed, or you get out. You choose that fantasy, you are no longer welcome in this house. You're on your own." The ultimatum hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Leo was smirking, clearly enjoying the show. My mother was openly crying now, but silently as always. I looked from my father's furious face to my mother's weeping one, to my brother's smug grin. And in that moment, something inside me broke. Or maybe it finally healed. I realized I wasn't losing a family. I had never really had one. I stood up slowly. "Okay," I said, my voice surprisingly calm. I walked back to my room, the sound of my own footsteps unnervingly loud. I didn't cry. The time for tears was over. I pulled my old duffel bag from the closet and started packing. Clothes, my portfolio, my art supplies. My entire life fit into one bag. When I walked back into the living room, they were all there, frozen in a strange tableau. My father stood with his arms crossed, a grim, stubborn look on his face. My mother was still at the table, sobbing into her hands. Leo didn't even look up from his phone. I walked to the front door, my bag slung over my shoulder. My father's voice cut through the air, hard as stone. "If you walk out that door," he said, "don't ever come back." I paused with my hand on the doorknob. I looked back at him one last time. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't say anything. I just opened the door, stepped out into the freezing Ohio night, and pulled it shut behind me. The click of the latch was the sound of my old life ending, and my new one beginning. The drive to California was a 2,000-mile blur fueled by cheap gas station coffee and the kind of bone-deep loneliness that feels like a physical weight. My beat-up 1998 Civic rattled with every mile, the engine whining a constant protest. Every cent I had in the world, a few $100s saved from a part-time dishwashing job, was in my wallet. The scholarship letter sat on the passenger seat, my only proof that I wasn't completely insane. The first few years in Los Angeles were brutal. They were a masterclass in humility and desperation. The scholarship covered tuition, but it didn't cover rent, food, or the ridiculously expensive art supplies the college required. So I worked. God, did I work. My life became a relentless cycle of exhaustion. I was a barista from 5 a.m. to noon, the smell of burnt coffee clinging to me all day. Then I'd race to campus for afternoon classes, my mind a fog of caffeine and sleep deprivation. After class, I'd work the night shift stocking shelves at a grocery store until 2 a.m., my body aching under the harsh fluorescent lights. I'd get home to my shoebox apartment, a place so small you could touch all four walls if you stretched, and try to get 2 or 3 hours of sleep before the alarm screamed me awake to do it all over again. I lived on ramen noodles and the stale pastries they were about to throw out at the coffee shop. I got so thin my clothes hung off me. There were times I'd be standing in a lecture on color theory, and the room would start to spin because I hadn't eaten a real meal in 2 days. The loneliness was the worst part. I was in a city of millions, surrounded by other ambitious young artists, but I felt completely and utterly alone. I'd see other students on the phone with their parents, getting words of encouragement, maybe a little help with rent. My phone never rang. In a moment of weakness during that first year, I called home. Leo answered. "Oh, it's you," he said, his voice flat with indifference. "Dad's not here." He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask if I was okay. We sat in silence for a few seconds before he said, "Look, I gotta go," and hung up. That was the last time I tried. The doubt was a constant companion, a nagging whisper in the back of my mind. Your father was right. You're a failure. You're starving. You're alone. You should have stayed. You should have just done what they wanted. There was one night about a year in that I almost gave up. My car broke down. The repair bill was more than I had in my bank account. I was failing a class because I was too exhausted to finish the final project, and my landlord was threatening eviction. I sat on the floor of my empty apartment, my head in my hands, and just sobbed. I was done. I was ready to crawl back to Ohio and beg for my father's forgiveness. But then, my eyes landed on my portfolio leaning against the wall. I crawled over and opened it. I looked at the drawings, the character designs, the storyboards. I saw the worlds I had created, the stories I wanted to tell. And I realized that giving up wasn't just about proving my father right. It was about killing the only part of myself that had ever felt real, the only part that had ever felt truly mine. So I didn't give up. I sold my car for scrap metal. I begged the professor for an extension. I picked up extra shifts. I fought. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. But every time I wanted to quit, I'd just hear my father's voice, "Don't ever come back." And it would fuel me. It was meant as a curse, but I decided to turn it into a promise. A promise to myself that I would never, ever go back to being that powerless boy in that suffocating house. Just when I thought the loneliness might actually consume me, I ran into Chloe Martinez at a campus library. I almost didn't recognize her. She looked as tired and worn down as I felt. We just stared at each other for a second, two ghosts from another life, and then she broke into a huge grin. "Hayes," she said, her voice a welcome sound from the past. "What the hell are you doing here?" Turns out, she'd made her own escape, taking out a mountain of student loans to get into the same program. We spent the next 3 hours catching up, pouring out all the struggles and frustrations of the past 2 years. It was the first time I felt like someone truly understood. That meeting changed everything. We became each other's support system. We'd critique each other's work, share art supplies we couldn't afford on our own, and pull all-nighters together in the computer lab, fueled by vending machine coffee. We resurrected our old high school dream of starting a studio. Only now it felt less like a fantasy and more like a battle plan. After graduation, the real world hit hard. Chloe got a low-level gig doing character assets for a mobile game company that paid her peanuts. I was freelancing, taking any miserable job I could find, designing logos for plumbing companies, illustrating terrible children's books for self-published authors. We were barely scraping by, sharing a slightly less terrible apartment, but we were creating. Every night, after our soul-crushing day jobs, we'd work on our passion project. It was a concept for an animated short film called The Desert Wanderer. It was about a lonely robot searching a post-apocalyptic wasteland for a single surviving flower. It was personal. It was all about hope in the face of desolation. It was our story. We poured every spare moment and every spare dollar into it. We knew it was our one shot to make a name for ourselves. After a year of painstaking work, we had a finished film. It was beautiful. It was heartfelt. And we were terrified. We decided to submit it to a small, independent animation festival. That's when we hit our first major roadblock, a taste of how vicious the industry could be. The festival organizer, a slick producer named Rick, loved our film. He loved it so much, he offered to help us get it seen and handle the distribution. He had us sign a complicated contract that we, in our naive excitement, barely read. That was our first big mistake. It was a classic trap. This was our first twist. A week later, Chloe's cousin, who was in law school, took a look at the contract out of curiosity. Her blood ran cold. Rick had buried a clause in the fine print that essentially gave his production company ownership of the intellectual property if it won any awards at his festival. He was setting us up to steal our creation. He knew we had something special, and he was planning to legally hijack it. We were horrified. We felt so stupid, so violated. We had worked for a year, poured our souls into this project, only to almost hand it over to a shark for nothing. We confronted Rick, who just smirked and pointed to our signatures. But Chloe's cousin found a loophole, a technicality in the contract's wording that made it contestable. We had to spend $1,000 we didn't have on a lawyer to send a threatening letter. But it was enough to make Rick back off. He withdrew the film from the festival, calling us ungrateful amateurs. We were devastated. Felt like a huge failure. But it was the most important lesson we ever learned. It taught us to be ruthless, to read the fine print, and to trust no one but each other. It forged us into a team not just of artists but of partners. We had faced our first monster and won. We didn't know it then, but that ugly experience was the final piece of training we needed before our lives changed forever. After the disaster with the festival, we were demoralized. We had our film back, but our path to getting it seen was gone. We were sitting in our apartment one night, surrounded by takeout boxes, feeling like complete failures. So what now? I asked, poking at a cold noodle. Chloe was staring at her laptop, a determined glint in her eye. Forget the gatekeepers, she said. Let's take it straight to the people. That night, we uploaded The Desert Wanderer to YouTube. We didn't have a marketing budget. We just posted the link on a few animation forums and social media groups with a simple message: a passion project a year in the making. Hope you like it. Then we went to bed, expecting maybe a few hundred views from friends and fellow artists. We woke up to a revolution. Our phones were melting down. The video hadn't just gotten a few hundred views. It had 10,000. By noon, it was at 50,000. By the end of the day, it had crossed 100,000 views and was on the front page of Reddit. The comments were a tidal wave of emotion. People from all over the world were connecting with our little robot. They were sharing their own stories of loneliness and hope. It was overwhelming. By the end of the week, the view count was in the millions. My email inbox, which was usually filled with freelance rejections and spam, was suddenly exploding with messages. They were from producers, from agents, from other artists. And then, the email that changed everything arrived. It was from a venture capital firm that specialized in tech and media startups. The sender, a man named Benjamin Calloway, said he'd been moved to tears by our film and saw massive potential in the storytellers behind it. He wanted to meet. We thought it was a prank. We spent a whole day verifying his identity. It was real. A week later, Chloe and I were sitting in a sleek, glass-walled boardroom that cost more than everything we owned combined. We were terrified, but we remembered the lesson from Rick the Shark. We came prepared. We had a business plan. We had ideas for more stories. We had a vision. We walked out of that meeting with a check for $500,000 in seed funding. The condition was simple: form a company and create more content. That day, sitting in our old Civic, holding a check that felt like a piece of science fiction, we officially founded Phoenix Animation. We chose the name because we had risen from the ashes of our old lives, from the rejection and the struggle. The next 2 years were a whirlwind. With the funding, we hired a small team of talented animators, many of whom were our struggling friends from college. We rented a small studio space. We worked 18-hour days, but for the first time, it wasn't out of desperation. It was out of passion. Our next project, an animated web series, became a runaway hit. It led to merchandise deals, a comic book adaptation, and eventually, an offer from a major streaming service to develop a full-length feature film. The money started pouring in amounts that seemed completely unreal. We paid off our student loans in a single wire transfer. We moved out of our crappy apartment. We were finally, unbelievably, a success. I was living the dream I had barely dared to whisper in the back of an art class years ago. I was the co-founder and creative director of a thriving animation studio. But as the company grew, so did the complexities. And I was about to learn that the sharks in the pristine boardrooms could be just as dangerous as the ones in the seedy festival offices. Success is a strange beast. On one hand, it's everything you've ever wanted. The financial security, the creative freedom, the validation, it was intoxicating. But on the other hand, it brings a whole new set of problems. Our little passion project had grown into a multi-million-dollar business. And frankly, Chloe and I were artists, not CEOs. We were drowning in contracts, payroll, and corporate strategy. We needed help. That's when we hired Marcus Thorne. He came highly recommended, a polished business manager with a razor-sharp suit and an even sharper smile. He had a resume filled with impressive-sounding startups he'd helped scale. He talked our language, praising our creativity while promising to handle the boring stuff, so we could focus on what we did best. He seemed like the perfect solution, the missing piece of our puzzle. I trusted him. That was my second big mistake. Around the same time, we started getting unwanted attention from a company called Vance Animation, a massive, old-school studio run by the legendary Alistair Vance. His son, Derek Vance, was now running their acquisitions department. Derek was everything I despised. A smug, arrogant Nepo baby who had never had to struggle for anything in his life. He saw our fresh, independent studio as a shiny new toy to add to his father's collection. Derek's first offer to buy Phoenix Animation was insultingly low. We laughed and said no. But he was persistent. He started playing dirty, trying to poach our key artists with huge salary offers. He'd show up at the same industry events, making condescending remarks about our little internet cartoons. He was a constant, annoying presence, a fly buzzing around our heads that we couldn't seem to swat away. I complained about Derek to Marcus during one of our weekly meetings. "The guy is a vulture," I said. "He won't leave us alone." Marcus just nodded sympathetically, making notes on a legal pad. "Don't worry, Carter," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I'll handle him. I'll make sure our legal protections are ironclad. He won't be able to touch us." I felt a wave of relief. It felt good to have someone like Marcus in our corner, a professional to fight these corporate battles. He was handling our finances, negotiating our contracts, and protecting us from predators like Derek. Little did I know, I had invited the biggest predator of all right into the heart of my company. While I was worried about the wolf circling the hen house, the fox was already inside, counting the chickens. The signs were there, small things that seemed insignificant at the time. A hushed phone call Marcus would end quickly when I walked into his office. A vague answer about a budget discrepancy. I ignored them, too busy and too willing to trust the man we were paying to protect us. The betrayal came to light because of Chloe's meticulous nature. She never fully trusted Marcus's smooth charm. She kept her own copies of our financial records, a habit she developed after our run-in with Rick the Festival Shark. One night, she was cross-referencing our server logs with Marcus's expense reports and found something that made her stomach drop. She called me at 2 a.m. Her voice was tight with fury. "Get down to the studio. Now." When I got there, she was standing in the dark office, her face illuminated by her monitor. She pointed at the screen. "Look." It was a log of external data transfers from our server. Every week, for the past 3 months, a massive data packet had been sent to an anonymous, encrypted IP address. The transfers always happened late at night, and they always coincided with Marcus logging in remotely to finalize reports. "It could be anything," I said, trying to find a rational explanation. "No," Chloe said, her voice like ice. "I did some digging. That encrypted IP address? I had a friend in tech trace it. It bounces all over the world, but the final destination is a server registered to one company." She clicked her mouse, and a logo appeared on the screen. Vance Animation. The air left my lungs. Couldn't be. Marcus? He was selling us out. He was feeding our concepts, our financial data, our entire creative strategy, directly to our biggest rival. Derek Vance wasn't just guessing our moves. He had our playbook. This was our second major twist, a gut punch from someone we had welcomed into our inner circle. The next morning, we called Marcus into a meeting. It was just the 3 of us in the main conference room. "We know, Marcus," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. He tried to play dumb, his charming smile faltering for the first time. "Know what? Is there a problem with the quarterly projections?" Chloe slid a printed copy of the server logs across the polished table. "The problem," she said, "is that our business manager is a corporate spy." The color drained from his face. He was caught. There was no way to talk his way out of it. He started to stammer, to make excuses, but I held up a hand to stop him. "Just tell me why," I said. It was the only thing I wanted to know. His composure finally cracked. "Why? Because you too are children playing in a sandbox. He spat, his voice filled with venom. You have no idea what you're sitting on. Derek Vance understands the real value, the real business. You artists, you just get in the way. We fired him on the spot. Our lawyer, Jessica, handled the fallout, threatening a massive lawsuit that kept him from ever working in the industry again. The experience left a scar. It made me harder, more cynical, but it also taught me a valuable lesson. It taught me that my inner circle had to be small and built on years of proven loyalty. It was just me and Chloe, the two weird art kids, against the world. And honestly, I was starting to like those odds. We had survived another attack and we were stronger for it. We had no idea the biggest battle was still to come. Not from a boardroom, but from my own front door. And that brings us back to my living room. Back to the uncomfortable silence, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning. My father, my mother, and my brother sat awkwardly on my custom-made Italian sofa, looking like they'd landed on another planet. I poured them glasses of water, my movements calm and deliberate. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me flustered. I sat in the armchair across from them, creating a physical distance that mirrored the emotional one. I just waited. I knew they hadn't driven all the way from Ohio to admire my architecture. Frank cleared his throat, taking on the familiar role of family spokesman. Carter, he began, trying for a tone of fatherly warmth that he had never possessed. We know things ended badly. We've all said things we regret. I just nodded, my face a blank canvas. 5 years is a long time, I said, my voice neutral. It is. My mother jumped in, her voice trembling slightly. It's too long. We've missed you. A family shouldn't be apart like this. Leo, for his part, just grunted in agreement, his eyes still roaming around the room, mentally calculating the cost of everything he saw. The small talk was excruciating. They asked about my business, their voices laced with a mixture of awe and resentment. I gave them short, polite answers. The tension in the room was so thick you could taste it. Finally, after 10 minutes of this painful dance, Frank got to the point. He leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. The truth is, son, we're in trouble. A lot of trouble. And then the floodgates opened. It was a well-rehearsed performance, a symphony of sob stories. Frank went first. The factory where he'd worked for 30 years had shut down 6 months ago. Automation. He was 58, he said. Too young to retire, but too old to get hired anywhere else. The severance was gone. The unemployment was running out. Then it was my mother's turn. With Frank's income gone, they'd fallen behind on the mortgage. They were facing foreclosure. The house I grew up in, the shrine to Leo's greatness, was about to be repossessed by the bank. She started to cry, soft, silent tears, just like she always had. Then came Leo, the golden boy. His story was the most pathetic of all. His promising sports career had ended with a knee injury in college. He'd bounced between dead-end sales jobs, trying to recapture the glory of his high school days. He'd gotten into online sports betting, he mumbled, thinking he could make one big score to help out. He hadn't. He'd lost everything. Now, he owed a substantial amount of money to some very unpleasant people. The collectors were calling at all hours. They laid it all out, a tapestry of failure and bad decisions. I listened patiently, my expression unreadable. I felt a flicker of something, but it wasn't sympathy. It was a cold, distant sense of cosmic irony. They, who had worshipped at the altar of practicality and safe choices, had ended up with nothing. And I, the foolish dreamer, was their last hope. We're not asking for a handout, Frank said, the lie tasting bitter even in my ears. We're asking for a loan, to get back on our feet. $100,000. That would solve everything. You can afford it, Carter. We're your family. Families are supposed to help each other. His words hung in the air. Families are supposed to help each other. The hypocrisy was so staggering it was almost breathtaking. I just looked at him, at the man who had thrown me out, at the man who had told me my dreams were worthless, now begging me to finance his reality. I let the silence stretch, watching the hope and desperation warring on their faces. They thought they were playing their final card. They had no idea I was holding the entire deck. I took a slow sip of my water. I set the glass down on the coaster with a soft click. The sound seemed to echo in the silent room. "You're right," I said, my voice perfectly level. $100,000 isn't a lot of money to me now. A collective sigh of relief went through them. Hope bloomed on their faces. My father sat up straighter. My mother's crying subsided. They thought they had won. "But we're not going to talk about money," I continued, my eyes locking onto my father's. "Not yet. First, we're going to talk about truth." I pulled out my phone. My movements were unhurried. I scrolled through my archived messages, all the way back to a text from 3 years ago. It was from my Aunt Patty. She had sent it to me by mistake, thinking she was texting my mother. It was a single sentence that confirmed everything I had suspected about her two-faced nature. I held the phone out. "Remember the family trip to the lake 3 years ago?" I asked. "The one I only found out about because Aunt Patty posted pictures on Facebook?" My mother flinched. The message on the screen read, "Eleanor, just make sure not to mention the lake trip to Carter if he calls. It's better if he doesn't know. We don't want any drama. Aunt Patty was always so good at playing the victim for me, and the instigator for you," I said softly, stirring the pot, making sure the wound never healed. "But that's just a minor detail, a symptom of the real disease." I put my phone away. The mood in the room had shifted. The hope was gone, replaced by a tense confusion. "You came here today and you talk about family," I said, my voice gaining a hard edge. "You say families help each other. But for that to be true, you have to actually be one." I leaned forward. "So let's stop the performance. I know this isn't about the house or the factory or your gambling debts, Leo." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. "This is about what you did last Tuesday night." This was it. The real twist. The final, hidden truth. Leo's face went completely white. He looked like he'd been struck by lightning. My father's jaw went slack. My mother let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. "I got a call 2 days ago," I said, my voice cold and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. "From Gary, our old neighbor Gary. His wife is in the hospital. A hit and run. A silver sedan, just like yours, Leo, ran a red light and T-boned her car. Witnesses saw the driver get out, look at what he'd done, and then get back in his car and speed away." The room was utterly still. I could hear my own heartbeat. Gary remembered seeing my name in an article online. He called me, crying, not to ask for money, but just because he was heartbroken and didn't know who else to turn to. He told me the police have a partial plate. It's only a matter of time. You're not here for a loan. You're here for hush money. You're here for a high-powered lawyer. You're here because you think my success, the very thing you despised, can get the golden boy out of the consequences of his own actions one more time. Silence. A dead, horrifying silence. Their faces were a ruin of shock and exposure. They were caught. Every lie, every manipulation, every ounce of their selfish, toxic love for their favored son was laid bare under the bright California sun streaming through my windows. My father tried to speak, but only a dry croak came out. I stood up. I looked down at the 3 people who had caused me so much pain, who had tried to break my spirit, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty pity. The time for anger was long gone. "The answer," I said, my voice clear and final, "is no." This was the moment that changed everything. The moment I finally took back my power, not with anger, but with truth. Thank you for sticking with me to this point. You are amazing. If you're still here, please do me a huge favor and like this video and comment with the number 1 down below. It lets me know you've been on this journey with me. It doesn't just help more people find this story. It tells me that my experiences mean something to someone out there. Your support is the biggest reason I have the courage to share the rest of this. For a full 10 seconds, nobody moved. It was like I'd frozen them in time, 3 statues of desperation. Then the spell broke. My father was the first to react. He shot to his feet, his face turning a dark, mottled red. The mask of the concerned father was gone, replaced by the furious, cornered man I remembered so well from my childhood. "You ungrateful brat!" he roared, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. "After everything we did for you, we raised you, we fed you, we put a roof over your head, and this is how you repay us? You'd let your own brother go to jail. The brother who called me a freak?" I shot back, my voice still calm, which only seemed to make him angrier. "The brother who stood by and smirked while you threw me out? The roof you put over my head came with conditions, Dad. The food you fed me came with a price, and I paid it. I'm done paying." My mother was sobbing hysterically now, grabbing at my arm. "Please, Carter, please," she begged, her words dissolving into incoherent pleas. "He's your brother. Think of what this will do to us. The shame, your father's heart." I gently removed her hand from my arm. "You should have thought of that when you raised a man who would leave an innocent woman bleeding in the street to save himself," I said, my voice softening slightly, but my resolve firm as steel. "You should have thought of that every time you looked the other way, every time you made excuses for him, every time you chose him over me." Leo was still sitting on the couch, staring into space, his face ashen. The golden boy was broken. All the arrogance, all the swagger had been stripped away, leaving behind a pathetic, frightened man. "Let's go, Eleanor," Frank snarled, grabbing my mother by the elbow and hauling her to her feet. "He's made his choice. He's no son of mine." He turned to me one last time, his eyes filled with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. "I hope you're happy here, all alone with your money, because you will die alone." He stormed towards the door, dragging my mother with him. Leo stumbled to his feet and followed them like a lost child. They didn't look back. I walked them to the door and watched as they piled into their old, dented sedan. Frank slammed his door shut. The engine sputtered to life. As they pulled away, tires crunching on the gravel of my driveway, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel sadness. I didn't even feel anger anymore. I felt quiet. I closed the massive oak door, and the heavy thud of its sealing shut was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I slid the deadbolt across. Click. It was the sound of a chapter ending. The sound of a prison door finally locking from the inside. For the first time in my life, I was truly, completely free. I stood there in my silent house, the sun warming my face, and I breathed. In the days that followed, the silence from my family was absolute. It was a silence I welcomed, a silence I had earned. A few days later, a voicemail appeared on my phone from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, but curiosity got the better of me. It was my mother. Her voice was thick with tears, a desperate, rambling message filled with apologies, guilt, and pleas for me to reconsider. "I know we weren't fair to you, Carter. I was just trying to keep the peace. Your father, he can be so stubborn, but Leo is your brother. Please, don't let this happen. I'm begging you." I listened to the entire message, all 3 minutes of it. I listened to the pain in her voice, and I felt a pang of something, a ghost of the love a son should have for his mother. But it was just a ghost. The woman on the phone wasn't just a mother begging for her son. She was an enabler begging for her accomplice. Her peace had always come at the cost of mine. I took a deep breath, pressed the number 7, and deleted the message. I didn't call back. The next day, I had a meeting with my lawyer, Jessica Chin. She was sharp, no nonsense, and had been invaluable in protecting my company. Now I needed her to protect me. "I want to send them a cease and desist letter," I said, sitting in her clean, modern office. "All of them. Frank, Eleanor, Leo, and my Aunt Patty. No more phone calls, no more emails, no more unannounced visits." Jessica just nodded, a hint of a smile on her face. "Consider it done," she said. "Setting boundaries is the healthiest thing a person can do, Carter. Especially when dealing with a toxic family dynamic that could impact your business and personal well-being." The letter was sent. It was a formal, legal line drawn in the sand. It was a declaration that the bank of Carter Hayes was permanently closed. There would be no more emotional withdrawals. No more guilt trips. No more begging. That letter was one of the best investments I ever made. It bought me peace. It bought me closure. It allowed me to finally, truly move on. I knew there was no going back. The bridges hadn't just been burned. I had salted the earth where they once stood to make sure nothing could ever grow there again. Sounds harsh, I know. But sometimes the only way to save yourself is to amputate the parts of your life that are poisoning you. My family was a gangrenous limb, and I had finally found the courage to cut it off. 6 months passed. 6 months of peace, productivity, and quiet healing. My life moved forward, propelled by creative energy. Phoenix Animation signed a major deal for our first feature film. Chloe and I were working harder than ever, but it was joyful work, the kind that fills you up instead of draining you. I didn't seek out news about my family, but it found me anyway, through the digital grapevine. A friend from my old high school, Sarah Jenkins, sent me a message. She was one of the few people from my past I still occasionally talk to. Her message was hesitant, as if she wasn't sure if she should be telling me. The house in Ohio had been foreclosed on. Frank and Eleanor were living in a small, rented apartment across town. Frank, unable to find a new management job, had taken a part-time position as a greeter at a big-box store. The ultimate humiliation for a man so obsessed with status and real work. Leo had been arrested 2 weeks after their visit to my house. The evidence was overwhelming. With no high-powered lawyer to save him, he took a plea deal. He was serving a 2-year sentence for leaving the scene of an accident that caused serious injury. His golden boy shine was gone forever, tarnished in a county jail. Reading the news, I didn't feel a shred of satisfaction. There was no "I told you so" moment. There was just a profound sense of melancholy, a sadness for the wasted potential and the broken lives they had brought upon themselves. Their rigid, narrow view of the world had led them to this. Their choices had consequences. It was as simple and as tragic as that. One night, I was sitting in my studio, looking out at the glittering lights of the city. I thought about my own journey. I thought about the loneliness, the struggle, the fear. And I thought about the one person who had believed in me when no one else did, Professor Albright. He had passed away from cancer a year after I graduated, and I never got the chance to properly thank him, to show him what I had built on the foundation of his encouragement. An idea began to form in my mind. An idea that felt right, that felt like the perfect way to honor his memory and give my success a purpose beyond just my own comfort. The next day, I called Jessica again. "I want to start a foundation," I told her. 2 months later, I stood at a podium at my old college, announcing the launch of the Albright Fund. It was a nonprofit foundation, seeded with an initial donation of $5 million from my own pocket. Its mission was simple: to provide scholarships and grants to talented, low-income students in the arts whose families did not support their creative ambitions. We would provide not just money for tuition, but funds for supplies, emergency housing, and mentorship. We would be the support system that I never had. We would be the lifeline for the next generation of weird art kids who were being told their dreams were worthless. As I spoke to the crowd of students and faculty, I saw young faces in the audience, kids who looked as hopeful and as terrified as I once had. I was no longer just building a company. I was building a legacy. I was turning my pain into someone else's opportunity. It was the best project I had ever worked on. It was a way of telling the universe and myself that I had not only survived, but I had found a way to make my survival mean something. The launch of the Albright Fund generated a lot of positive press. It was a story the media loved. The local boy who was thrown out for his art makes it big and comes back to help others like him. The story brought an unexpected and welcome phone call. It was from Alistair Vance, the legendary founder of Vance Animation and Derek's father. I was hesitant to take the call, my past experiences with his son leaving a sour taste in my mouth. But this was Alistair Vance, a titan of the industry, one of my childhood heroes. I took the call. His voice was old but still powerful. He wasn't calling to talk about business or acquisitions. He was calling to talk about the fund. "I read about what you're doing, Carter," he said, his voice warm with genuine respect. "It's a fine thing, a noble thing. Your old teacher, Professor Albright. He would have been incredibly proud. You knew him? I asked, surprised. Alistair chuckled. Knew him? Young man, I owed him. Which brings me to the real reason I called. He paused, and what he said next completely floored me. It was the final, most unexpected twist of my story. You see, about 10 years ago, I received a phone call out of the blue. It was from a passionate, slightly eccentric art teacher in Ohio. He told me he had a student, a boy named Carter Hayes, who he believed was a once-in-a-generation talent. He said the boy's family didn't understand him, that they were trying to crush his spirit, and he was worried the world would lose a great artist before he ever had a chance. I was speechless. I sank into my chair. The phone pressed hard against my ear. This teacher, this Professor Albright, Alistair continued. He made me promise that if I ever saw your name cross my desk, I would pay close attention. He sent me a small portfolio of your high school work. I still have it. It was raw, but the talent was undeniable. He was your biggest champion, Carter, fighting for you in rooms you didn't even know you were in. Tears were streaming down my face. All those years I thought I was completely alone, fighting a solitary battle. I was wrong. Professor Albright hadn't just been my teacher. He had been my guardian angel. He had seen my future and had been quietly planting seeds on my behalf. My son Derek is a fool, Alistair said with a sigh. He sees business, not art. I, on the other hand, see both. I saw your first short film online. I knew immediately. That's Albright's boy, I said to myself. And look at you now. We talked for another hour. By the end of the call, Vance Animation had pledged to become a major corporate sponsor of the Albright Fund. It was a surreal, full-circle moment. The company that had once been my rival was now my partner in a mission that meant more to me than any film. After I hung up the phone, I sat in silence for a long time. I realized my family hadn't been defined by blood, but by choice. My real family was a sarcastic digital artist named Chloe, who fought by my side. It was a wise lawyer named Jessica, who protected me. And it was a lanky, paint-stained art teacher who believed in me so fiercely that he reached out across the country to make sure the world would be ready for me. The house Frank had accused me of dying alone in was, in fact, full. It was filled with the spirit of chosen family, with purpose, and with a profound sense of gratitude. The greatest inheritance I ever received wasn't money. It was the unwavering belief of a good man who saw me when no one else did. So here I am, sitting in my studio, in the house that I built, not with bricks and mortar, but with resilience and a stubborn refusal to be broken. The sun is setting over the canyon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that even I would have trouble recreating. It's beautiful, and it's peaceful. The journey here was a war, fought on battlefields I never chose. The scars are still there. They don't hurt anymore, but they are a part of me. They are a reminder of the price of freedom, a reminder that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away. They are a reminder that the loudest voices in your life are not always the ones you should listen to. My father was wrong. I didn't die alone. I'm surrounded by people I love and respect, a family I chose, a family that chooses me back every single day. And the work I do, the stories we tell at Phoenix Animation, and the young artists we support through the Albright Fund. That is a legacy that will live on long after I'm gone. That's not loneliness. That's connection. My story isn't about revenge. It's about reclamation. It's about taking back the narrative of your own life. It's about understanding that your worth is not determined by the people who are supposed to love you, but by the love you are willing to give to yourself and your dreams. The house they saw was just a symbol. The real thing I built was a life that didn't require their approval to be valid. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I hope it touched you in some way. I hope it gave some of you out there the strength to draw your own boundaries, to fight for your own dreams, no matter who tells you they're worthless. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect your own future? I'd be honored if you shared a piece of your story in the comments below. Let's create a community of support right here. And please, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. Your story matters. Thank you.